Everyone to tonight's virtual public meeting on St. George's Leisure Centre. We hope you're all keeping safe and well, and thank you for taking time to join us tonight. So like I said, we'll be focusing on the future of St. George's Leisure Centre in Wapping. If you would like to ask a question this evening that you already haven't submitted, please post it in the Q&A box top, and we will make them live one at a time to be answered. If we get a few questions around the same topic, we will put one of those questions to help us get through as many as possible. Now, other points to cover for today, a high volume of questions have already been sent, so we'll do our best to go through them. We have received many questions in advance, so if your question isn't answered tonight, we'll get back to you by email. If you submit a question live tonight, please only do so once. Please be aware that this session is being recorded, and also please submit questions with your name if you're comfortable to do so. Note that anything you submit may be included in the recording alongside your name. Keep a lookout on the other sidebar, as we may post useful links for you to browse afterwards. If you drop out for any reason, please rejoin using the same link that's been in your inbox that you've used at the start of the event. Importantly, we'll also be asking for your feedback in a short survey. We'd really appreciate you giving us your thoughts. Sorry, I didn't introduce myself. So my name is Councillor Sabina Akhtar. I'm the lead member for Culture, Art and Brexit, and this Leisure Centre falls in my portfolio as well. So I'll be chairing today's meeting, and I'll introduce the Mayor now before I introduce James Thomas for the presentation part. So Mayor John Biggs, if you would like to do a short introduction.
Okay, thank you, Sabina. And as Sabina said, I'm John Biggs. I'm the Mayor of Tower Hamlets, and happen to be a Wapping resident as well. So I know St George's and the Wapping area pretty well. I know most of the borough pretty well as well. So we've got an hour for this meeting this evening, and I apologise that we're not meeting in person. Before I forget, I was going to say I'm hoping we can meet in September and have a face-to-face meeting where people can ask more searching questions, because this is not the most satisfactory format, but this is what we're doing right now. So the history is that we're very frustrated with the position with St George's Baths. James Thomas, who is our Corporate Director for Children and Culture, will be doing a presentation in a minute, taking you through some slides which helps to explain the position we're in. We got no agenda to shut St George's, replace it with another pool. We want to have an informed consultation with people. I want to make a number of commitments at the end of the slide presentation, which people can, I hope, hold me to account for. And this is, if you like, the beginning of a process of consultation leading to decision making, leading to us continuing to provide swimming either at St George's or possibly at another site, but that comes up in the presentation in a minute. What else can I tell you? Well, there's a number of questions which have been posed already, and so we'll be addressing those in the question and answer part of the meeting. And I know there's a lot of interest in this issue, and I want us to be as transparent as possible about it. And I know St George's is much loved by people who much love it, which is perfectly reasonable. But I won't stray into James Thomas's presentation, and I won't pass any particular judgments on this. I haven't made my mind up to pursue any particular path, although the information you're about to see will highlight the challenges that we face. And as we come out of COVID, we need to provide good leisure facilities for people, as I think we have in the past, and we need to improve on that. And I'm clear about that, and I'm annoyed that we are where we are. So I'll stop at that point and hand over, I think, to you, Chair, or straight to Mr. Thomas.
Yeah, thank you, Mayor, for that introduction. And like you said, Mayor, over to you, James Thomas, the Corporate Director of Children and Culture, for the presentation.
Thank you very much, Councillor Akhtar. Thank you, Mayor. David, are you able to load the slides up? Thank you very much. And I'll aim to take us through these reasonably briskly so that we have as much time for questions as possible. So David, if you move on to the first substantive slide. So quickly about the history of St George's. It's a 1960s building. It's a building of its time with a concrete frame, and as designs of the 1960s did, the the plant, fabric and the services are all very integrated in a way that's not true of kind of modern design. I know how valued St George's is by the community. I've spoken to kind of users directly. I've read through all of the contributions to the petition that I think there was last year. It's a key resource for our local primary schools in teaching of swimming, and for the last 5 years it's been one of 5 pools for the borough. If you want to move on, David. Thank you. So why did St George's close in 2020? Well, initially it closed along with all of the pools in the country as part of the lockdown and the government guidance with the onset of the pandemic. Why hasn't it reopened? Well, initially it couldn't be operated in a COVID secure way, but as we resurveyed the building, it became clear that it wasn't possible to reopen in the state that it was in. So that's really why it hasn't already reopened. And this slide is a key one really, because it tells the kind of story at a headline level of the issues that have been identified with the building as far back as 2008. And that is the first point at which the significant issues with the ageing building were identified, and the need for significant investment. That took place over the following 3 years up to 2011, and what was kind of said at the time was that that was to add at least 5 years life to the building. If we then wind forward 5 years to 2016, further investment was needed, and over the following 3 years another £250,000 more or less was invested to keep the building going. And then in 2019 there were full structural and condition surveys completed, and they showed profound issues with the building. And before decisions could be made about what the options, what was the right option to address those issues, global pandemic hit in early 2020, and the pool stopped functioning. There was a basic maintenance regime in place, but when we've resurveyed the building in 2021, it's clear there has been further deterioration, in part with the pool not being in regular action. This slide is really just to show that with the deteriorating condition of the centre, there has been a reduction in swimming use at St George's in the 5-year period, kind of before we hit lockdown. If you move on, David, thank you. Headlines from what the surveys have shown, which I hope will sort of give a sense of how profound the issues are. So there have been structural findings. We've used specialist consultant structural engineers to report on this. There are problems with the concrete. There's a problem with rusting of the concrete reinforcement. There's significant issues with the roof. There's bad corrosion of the conducts through which all the wiring and the electrics runs, and the external tiles are not in a good state, and some starting to come away. The plant condition has also had specialist engineering consultants, and the view is that the plant and equipment is beyond economical repair. There are particular issues with the pool ventilation system not being fit for purpose, and that in turn has resulted in intensive condensation, which has been one of the causes of the structural deterioration. There are problems with the electrical panel boards and the feed, the main electrical feed going into the building, and it's clear that even if repaired as is, the building wouldn't meet the current expected standards in terms of carbon emissions. Also, clearly there would be a need for significant work to upgrade the public spaces. So both the fabric and decoration in reception pool halls, changing rooms, all of the sort of key used areas and improvements to accessibility would be needed as well. These are just some photographs that are taken from the survey reports, which just give an indication of the state of things. The estimated costs, and we are still kind of testing these costs to see if St George's could be reopened at a lower cost, does come to just shy of £10 million. The largest cost being replacement of plant, but then significant costs around electrical works, as well as the concrete and the fabric, and then the other costs that are associated with any major capital investment. That would enable reopening and would enable the St George's to run for some time, but it wouldn't resolve all of the underlying issues. That still would be essentially a repair job on a deteriorating structure. So what are our next steps? What are our options, given the objective is to restore swimming provision in the southwest of the borough? Well, in terms of the long term, we think St George's would need a complete reconfiguration or a rebuild, which would give an opportunity to increase the dry side of the leisure centre, the gym space, improve accessibility, have a building that could meet carbon targets, and be a more financially viable building as well. Second option is, could we add a new pool at John Orwell Leisure Centre? And we have looked at, would it be possible to manage with just 4 pools in the borough and support local residents in the southwest to use those pools. We've done initial scoping of the John Orwell option and that's shown that we think it is a possibility, and so we're now progressing to a full feasibility study. If we went with that decision, ultimately, it's potentially there's a potential to realise capital receipt on the St George's site, which could contribute to a new pool. We're looking at the feasibility study would look at how a pool could be integrated with the current leisure centre at John Orwell, and we would get the benefits of a modern design. In terms of short and medium term options, because any major new provision obviously is going to take some years before it would be ready to use. So could we, option 1, reopening St George's, even if it doesn't have an extended lifetime for a minimum of 5 years. We're also looking at feasibility into a temporary structure, a temporary pool structure, and we've learned from examples of where these have been provided elsewhere. They're technically, the word is demountable, short life pools. We are committed to supporting all of our primary schools to ensure that swimming lessons take place in the next school year, starting from September. We're looking at options to help residents in the southwest to use Poplar and Mile End pools. And we are having a review of some previous analysis about a Lido option, although I should say that that analysis at this point suggests that a Lido is not a like-for-like replacement, and so wouldn't kind of stand as a full replacement for St George's. Mayor, shall I hand back to you for the last slide?
Yep. So I need to be switched on as live, I think. How does this work?
No, it's fine. Carry on.
Can I?
Yes.
Okay. I don't understand this technology. So assuming that I'm live, even though it says that James Thomas is live. So I think I'm live now, according to the little red flag I see. So this slide summarises the position that I'm taking as mayor. I'm an executive mayor, and obviously, and that's open to challenge as well. But this is the position I'd like us to adopt, which is, as an earlier slide said, we could make do with 4 pools in the borough, and I'm committed to us maintaining 5 pools in Tower Hamlets. That does obviously have capital costs, because whatever we do, whether we repair or modernise St George's or build an alternative pool, that's quite expensive. It also has revenue costs as well, although we have budgets to cover the revenue costs for 5 pools. and a new pool or a refurbished pool would be cheaper to operate. Swimming pools are money pits in most cases for local councils. They will cost several £100,000 of running costs each year, which tend not to be covered by the income from renting them. People in the leisure business will tell you that it's better to have wet and dry facilities alongside each other, managed alongside each other, and that creates a more viable financial proposition. But I'm happy for that to be challenged. The second option then is to complete the feasibility studies for both the shorter and longer term options in 3 months. And this is into the St George's pool, and also I think the feasibility into building an alternative. The third one, which James Thomas has already covered, is I need us to ensure that we provide access to swimming for primary school children and support for local residents to access swimming, which would have to be in other parts of the borough for the time being. I'll be very clear that the fourth commitment then is about transparency and answering all questions. But one thing that's become clear to me, and I've become very annoyed about this, because like a lot of you watching this podcast, you'll say, why don't we just open the flaming thing again? There is no easy short-term option for reopening the pool. And there'll be some questions later which we can examine, which will probe into that. And as I said, happy to have a longer meeting in the autumn to go into it further. So the fifth commitment then is about the public consultation in the autumn. And by then, unless we have a flare-up of COVID, we'll be meeting in public, and you can see me in the flesh and you can challenge me and my officers about what we're doing. Then the sixth option then is that the sixth commitment is that we need to carry out a wider consultation on the recommissioning of leisure for the borough for 2024. So our leisure contract currently run by GLL under their various branding. That contract is coming up for renewal, and so we need to re-tender. And as part of that, we'll look at our wider leisure provision in the borough for future generations. The borough is still growing at one of the fastest rates in the country. Till last year, it was the fastest in the country, but I think Newham is catching up with us because we're running out of land, but which is one of the issues about providing facilities. But they're my commitments, and happy to answer questions. So I think we go back to Sabina now.
Yes.
We can take the slides down, I guess.
Okay, so thank you, Mayor John Biggs and James Thomas for that presentation. And hopefully that was more useful and much more informative for the residents. Also, so this part of the session will be taking some questions, and like I said before, we have some questions that were sent to us earlier on. So the first question is, why was the swimming pool not properly maintained when it was closed for the first lockdown? So maybe over to you.
So shall I come back on that? And again, I'm befuddled by this technology. Yes, I'm live, so I'll come back on that. The starting point is we have 5 swimming pools in the borough. We have Mile End Leisure Centre, we have Poplar Baths, which was rebuilt a few years back. We have Tiller Roads on the Isle of Dogs, York Hall in Bethel Green, and St George's. And those last 3, so Tiller, St George's and York Hall, are all fairly old swimming pools. And when they were switched off for COVID, I guess we didn't know how long they'd be switched off for. And they because of the age of the plants and stuff in them, the ventilation systems, they do take longer to recommission than the 2 more modern ones. And that's basically the question, is how we recommission the pools. Now, would it have been sensible for us to keep them ticking over for the last year? Well, that's an easy assertion to make. I think, as Mr. Thomas's presentation makes clear, we've had a backlog of need to invest in our swimming pools over the last few years, and so we're refurbishing Tiller Road. We're getting York Hall back into action. St George's is the toughest nut because it is quite an old pool. I've lived in the borough for a bit over 40 years now, and when I first moved here, I was in Cable Street next to St George's. I used to swim there every Saturday morning before I allowed my life to be taken over by community politics, and I'd swim every Saturday morning. It was already feeling quite worn out 40 years back. It's had a couple of dollops of investment in it, but it is fairly worn out facility. And happy for this to be examined further. James Thomas might want to add something in terms of what our arrangement with GLL was in terms of the mothballing of our leisure facilities.
Thank you, Mayor. Yes, so the expectation was that GLL, or Better as they're branded in Tower Hamlets, did maintain basic maintenance, but that didn't mean that everything was running as it would have been as usual when open. Hence the need to kind of resurvey all of our leisure centres as they were coming back into use, and sadly that's where we've found the need for additional work, and St George's can't reopen without that.
Okay, thank you. So the next question sent to us was, can you please confirm which provisions will be put in place to enable residents to access a swimming pool? So over to you, Mayor.
Okay, so the simple answer is that there are currently 2, pretty soon 3 of our 5 pools will be functioning. The 4th, Tiller Road, is being refurbished because it has similar but nothing like as bad a set of problems as St George's, and St George's will not be able to reopen in the immediate future because it does need so much extra work on it. So there will be 4 pools working, hopefully by the end of this year, and they will be the offer for people in the borough. Other residents can obviously go to pools in other boroughs. I'm not suggesting people should go to other boroughs because we're not providing the service, but people do use facilities across London, and we're happy to look at ways in which people in the southwest of the borough who can't access services easily might be supported in getting to pools, but we probably can't provide local authority funded public transport for that. Again, I'm a double act with James on this, and James has a team of officers behind him, so I don't know if he wants to add anything on that. I suppose he's nodding negatively. So the other bit then is, one of the things I've asked us to look into is whether you can, a bit like getting a bouncy castle, or it's a bit less trivial than that, whether you can get some sort of easily assembled training pool and put that in, say, John Orwell car park. These things are apparently more difficult and expensive than you might think. The question I asked supplementary to that was whether we could have a smaller pool which would be particularly usable by primary school kids who need to do this as part of their curriculum. And one of the things that we are doing with the education team at the council is looking at the provision of pools across the borough, including the number of pools that are in primary and secondary schools, and whether they can be used efficiently to provide swimming lessons for kids. I think that's the case, isn't it, James? James is nodding as if in agreement. So I think that we can switch over to him and he can maybe add to that. But I think that's roughly where we are. Go on, say something else, James, in terms of our alternative provision.
Yes, so in terms of schools, we know that some of the schools that were using St George's, we have already made alternative arrangements, got those in place. And for the rest of them, we'll be working intensively with them as soon as they resume in September to ensure that they can all fulfil their curriculum commitment to swimming lessons over the course of the next school year. We are keen to look at other options if and we're open to suggestions about if there are additional ways that we could assist residents in the southwest to get to Poplar and Mile End pools. We know, I mean, for some people it's not too difficult to use public transport, but that's not true of everyone. And so we're also wanting to have a look at, is there any additional assistance that we could put in place that would work, that would be effective for them?
Okay, thank you, James. Now, the next question that we've got live that's come in, but we don't know from who. The question is, why precisely can St George's not remain open in the very short term, so 6 months to 1 year, until medium and long-term options are agreed upon?
Okay. So I think the answer to this has been covered by the slide presentation as well, which is that a number of these questions were submitted in advance, by the way, so people may be making further questions in the chat line. But I think the answer is that it's simply, if it was a car or something that should been sitting on the driveway for a while, that might be a good analogy. You might be able to just put a bit of oil in it or something and switch the engine on, and it would start running again. It might be a bit cranky, might need a bit of maintenance. I think the assessment of our professional advisors is the amount of work needed at St George's to get it up and running again is pretty enormous compared to that. It's a fairly significant piece of work, so we would then need to specify and tender that work. That's how local authorities work, and we would then have to get a contractor in place, and we think that that's not feasible in the short term. I don't have a figure for how long it would take to get St George's up and running in the 5-year lifetime state, but I would think it would be at least a year, he said recklessly. But Mr. Thomas, do you have a timeline on that?
So I think we've put this question to our surveyors and our colleagues in asset management, and I think that their estimate is that it would be at least 12 months of active work on the building, and obviously, as you've indicated, Mayor, there would be other steps to procure the contractors to carry that out that would also add to that timeline. So it's probably end to end, more like 18 months.
Okay. And I'd just like to add on that myself and the Mayor have raised this question several times, like why we can't just reopen for the short term. And, you know, the response that we have is if we could, we would. It's a huge amount just to reopen, it's not just like even to open for a day, it's a huge amount. Okay, so the next question is, how much will it cost to reopen St George's? Who will cover this, LBTH or Better Leisure?
Okay.
Mayor.
So again, I think this was partly covered in the presentation, but going back on the last question about reopening, I'm really happy for us to go away and look at whether there is an option in which we just go in and flick all the switches and see what happens. But the advice I have is that that's simply not going to work. And obviously I'm not a swimming pool engineer or a mechanical engineer or a ventilation engineer. So, you know, we'd have to get the stuff recommissioned. There are issues about air quality in swimming pools, about Legionnaire's disease, and about making sure the filters are in a good place and so on, and checking the boilers are working. So it's not as simple as flicking a switch. I'm advised by my officers that we've done surveys of the mechanics and the gubbins and the boilers and stuff, which tells us that some of them might work, but others would not be sufficient. It is a large pool, obviously, and it would take quite a lot of work to get it into that order. So following into the next question then, which is how much will it cost to reopen St George's and who will cover this town? It's your Better Leisure. So how much it will cost, again, given a commitment to feasibility studies, and as James Thomas has said, and as Sabina, my lead member, has said, we're happy to examine those figures and share them publicly, subject to any confidentiality issues, which is not a cover-up or anything. It's just the way it works in terms of local authority tendering, and I can explain that further if people need us to. But very happy to examine the figures and the sort of specifications. Happy for people to look at engineering reports and so on. And so the ballpark we have for opening it for 5 years would be roughly £10 million, which is an awful lot of money. Well, you need to compare that against the cost of alternatives. So it's not just £10 million to open a swimming pool or nothing. The cost of providing alternative would be pretty expensive, and so this may be more cost efficient. If it's only a 5-year extension in its life, then obviously that would be cheaper than doing a 25-year extension of its life, which would be a more significant piece of work, as I think Mr. Thomas has covered in his slideshow. So the answer to the question is it's more complicated than a simple answer. If we wanted to reconfigure St George's so it became more up to date, you'd want to look at building works that would create more suitable gym space, for example. You might want to reconfigure the changing rooms. You'd look at the way in which various bits of the circulation work. You'd want to improve disabled access facilities, which it wasn't really built in anticipation of all those years ago. The second part of the question, who will cover this cost, how much or Better Leisure? The answer is pretty simple, that the contract we have with Better Leisure or whoever else is running the pools is about the day-to-day operation. Any major capital work is a responsibility of the local council. We could, in theory, enter into a contract with a new provider, which would cover the cost of replacing all the facilities, but that would be an extremely expensive contract, and that's not the type of contract. I guess it would be viewed as a privatisation, effectively. That's not the sort of contract which most councils would do. And I think we have an additional problem, trying to give as comprehensive an answer as possible, which is post-COVID, a lot of leisure operators who before COVID would have happily tendered for these sorts of contracts, and indeed in a lot of London boroughs with more modern facilities were paying the council money for operating the facilities, in return for which they took the revenue risk and the operating costs. That climate has changed fundamentally, and leisure operators will now be a lot more nervous before they tender adventurously for our leisure facilities. So another part of James' presentation earlier on was about us retendering the contract, and getting that in the right place is quite complicated as well, given the current state of the marketplace. We'll be watching that very carefully. So it's quite a complicated operation. Do you want to add anything to that, Mr. Thomas? Because you've been, Mr. Thomas, by the way, is leading. We're not just sort of making it up this evening. We've been doing work on this for several months now, and it's proved quite complicated. And Mr. Thomas, our Director for Children's Services, is working as part of a project team which is looking at St George's. I've instructed my staff to give this priority, to put together the presentation this evening, but to put together the work behind it, which is about getting the right estimates and presentation in place, so that we can work out as transparently as possible and as openly as possible what the best options are for people in our borough. Do you want to add anything, Mr. Thomas?
Just briefly, Mayor, because you've outlined correctly the kind of position in terms of the respective responsibilities of Tower Hamlets Council and Better Leisure. I mean, Better Leisure are expected to address routine wear and tear, and they have an annual amount that they spend on each of the leisure centres in respect of that. But all of the significant capital maintenance, repairs or investment falls to the council.
Okay, just like to highlight that it's 7:34 p.m. and we're just over the halfway through the event, and we're leading to finish at 8 p.m. So
Okay.
lots of questions and lots to come. So the next question, which is been quite popular today, you can see from the chat box by the residents who are here today, and the question is, what is the LIDAR option they are referring to, even though it may not be like option for St George's?
Okay. Yep. So I'll give quicker answers. The LIDAR option is an option which is a very attractive option on the face of it, of using part of Shabwell Basin. If you look at the shape of it, it has a sort of arm along the southern side of it, and turning that into an open air swimming pool or a Lido. You could, in theory, I guess, even put a roof on it, but I think there's a conservation issue there. And people look at the example of the Lido in Hackney, which has been very successful, but there are a number of other Lidos across the country which have closed down or are proved to have challenging finances and are not as attractive. So the Lido option is about putting a Lido into Shabwell Basin. It's not like for like, because it's not a 365 day a year pool unless it has a roof on it, I don't think. But it is an attractive answer. There is a planning permission which may run out before long, but I think putting the finance in place for it, making it work, is something that we've committed ourselves to looking at again. Double act. Anything to add to that, Mr. Thomas?
James?
Nothing really significant. I mean, I think that we're very happy to look at all options at this point, and hear from local residents about their views on them. But I think one of the tests for a Lido, if it's the proposal that Lido is the southwest swimming option, it does have a number of difficult tests to pass, I think, in terms of, would it be suitable for school swimming lessons? Would it provide year-round swimming for most residents? I know some people manage to swim year-round, but I think they're probably a smallish minority. And does it meet the needs of all users? And I think yes. So we are having a review. We're having a look, as we are at all options. But I think there are some tough tests for a Lido option to pass if it were to be the swimming provision in the southwest of the borough.
Okay, thank you, James. Now the next question is, how can Tower Hamlets residents actively help to ensure St George's reopens?
Okay, and the answer to that is very simple. Get involved in the campaign. I know there's a campaign which says we must save and refurbish and reopen St George's swimming pool, and I'm offering you as mayor a consultation on the different options. Clearly, as a council, we need to look at the affordability of different options, but get involved in the consultation, ask searching questions. There's a balance here between, we could have a sort of 1 year long consultation which would delay making any decision. We're sort of hoping we can have a conversation over the autumn and then work out where we want to go forward. It won't have escaped the notice of some of you that we have an election in May next year. The elections are, funny events, not in the sense that they're amusing, but that they can become a mobiliser for a campaign of one kind or another. But I'm very happy with an outcome that leads to us saving St George's swimming pool. I just want to do that in a way that's transparent and affordable and has a sustainable long-term future for the pool. I think probably don't need a supplementary response from Mr. Thomas on that.
Yep. And we're happy to have as many people get engaged. Okay, could you explain more about the option of a new development, new pool? Is this new housing with a pool attached?
And I'll give you a quick answer to that. So the quick answer to that is that the idea is that there is land down by John Orwell Sports Centre in Wapping, and possibly with a slight reconfiguration of the swimming of the leisure centre, which already has some fairly good facilities, also has some fairly some facilities that probably need a bit of investment as well. You could stick a swimming pool on the ground there. No proposal to include it with housing. It would be a leisure centre in which you'd have what they in the trade call wet and dry facilities alongside each other. Obviously, as part of the feasibility for that, you could look at options in which you partly fund the pool with housing. But I suppose the magic bullet that might make it more economic would be that if you did that, and I'm not saying this is the outcome, and you chose to close St George's swimming pool, then you could demolish the St George's swimming pool and you could build housing on that site. And so indirectly, you could use the profit from a housing development or a land disposal to help fund a swimming pool at an alternative site. So that's how we think it works. I mean, the site in Wapping is quite sensitive because it's surrounded by conservation areas, it's a historic area, and so if that was the outcome, I'm fairly clear that I want us to build something that was attractive and provided a good swimming environment. I know that some people who like St George's really like the way that the light flows into it. Obviously, they like the length of it as well, so we want to talk about that. Most pools nowadays are 25 metres, whereas the one at St George's is 33 metres, I think. And we could talk about that option. Obviously, bigger pools cost more money, but that's something we could put into the mix. Okay, great. Now, since St George's is in Shadwell and Wapping, the next question is about where do you expect residents of Shadwell and Wapping to swim now? So, well, the factual answer to that question is that if you're a resident of Shadwell or Wapping and you want to swim now, then you'd have to use Mile End Leisure Centre or Poplar Baths, or fairly soon York Hall or Tiller Road Baths, because they'd be the 4 local authority swimming pools in the area. You might be able to use pools in other local authority areas, but I'm not the mayor of town. It's recommending you go and swim in other boroughs, although people always have done. For years now, I've been yearning for a London-wide leisure pass, which will allow you to use pools in each other boroughs areas, but that's proved to be quite elusive. But that is obviously another option. But that's not me saying we want to close our pools and use other boroughs' pools. I want us to rebuild or reopen a pool in the southwest corner of the borough. I don't know if Mr. Thomas wants to come back on either of those last 2 questions, but maybe not. Maybe we'll pick another one because we're running against the clock. Yep. So I'll give you a heads up before we're 15 minutes away to the end. So the next question is, how is Tiller Road being funded and why have you changed your strategy for that pool? Okay. The answer on Tiller Road, and maybe after I've answered this, is from Amanda, who's involved in the Turk's Head project and who is who I saw running down the road this morning on my way to work as well. So we met each other twice in one day, one in person, and the answer is that Tiller Road needs to be recommissioned. It's costing about £500,000 to refurbish it and get it opening again, and that's relatively affordable in terms of the business plan that we have. The difference with and that's being funded by the local authority through our capital programme. So it's relatively simple in terms of our capacity, and it's a fairly easily specified and self-contained piece of work. So it hasn't got any major replacements that we know of plant or materials. And why have we changed our strategy for that pool? Well, I don't think we have. I think I was assumed, and I do feel let down by my leisure team. I assumed that when COVID ended, we would simply press the buttons and get these things up and running again. I'm disappointed that hasn't happened. I'm the mayor, so I take responsibility for that, but I'm disappointed that that's happened. Have we changed the strategy? Just in terms of total transparency, there is a conversation with the social landlord next door to Tiller Road Baths, looking at whether they could fund a replacement of Tiller Road with, in that case, housing provided alongside or on top of it. It's quite a challenging proposition, but they're going to go and look at that. But in the meantime, we're opening it, we're funding it to be refurbished and to stay open into the indefinite future. Everyone at this meeting, I assume, well, maybe not everyone, is from the Wapping and Shadwell area or is interested in that area. But longer term, we want to also look at the leisure facilities on the Isle of Dogs, because the Isle of Dogs has quadrupled in its population and still has just the one swimming pool, which is a fairly small pool. Poplar Baths is nearby, but the leisure facilities on the Isle of Dogs could be improved, and that's one of the things I'd like to look at if I continue as mayor. Maybe Mr. Thomas wants to come back on those last clutch of questions, but I'll leave it up to you, Chair.
Okay, so we're just 15 minutes away, and I just wanted to add on this question that we had estimated some of the repairs that were needed, and we were given information on it. But once the construction team were there, they realised other works were needed, and that's why, you know, some of the delay. But obviously, it's very disappointing. We did expect to reopen Tiller much earlier. Okay, so we're 50 minutes away till the end, so just a few more questions now. Okay, the next question is, can Section 106 or Community Infrastructure Levy be used to protect St George's Leisure Centre? So Mayor John Biggs.
So the answer to this question is yes, but it's not as easy as it sounds. So for those who aren't acquainted with this, Section 106 and Community Infrastructure Levy are payments that we get from developers who build things. So for example, someone will build a massive block of flats and they will provide, according to a levy system, or which is the Community Infrastructure Levy, or a specific thing which is Section 106, dollops of money for particular things. Community Infrastructure Levy is like it forms a sort of bucket of money which can be provided for infrastructure, and that could be used to fund a swimming pool. Section 106 tends to be more specific, and so if it has a leisure use attached to Section 106, without getting too technical, it could be used to fund something like this. But the answer is that could be, but we have a massive capital programme in the borough, and we fund different things in different ways. So if we build housing, we may borrow the money, or we may have money in reserves. If we're building a swimming pool, we may borrow the money for that, or we may have money in reserves. We may use Community Infrastructure Levy money. So in a sense, it doesn't really matter what the source of the money is. Providing we have a capital programme that can fund this work, then we would fund this work. And I'm confident that we do have the financial capacity to re-provide or refurbish a swimming pool if that's what we choose to do. So I don't think money is an object in that sense, although there is an opportunity cost, which is that if we spend money on a swimming pool, then we're not spending money on something else. So it might mean that there is pressure on other parts of our capital programme. We have a very ambitious capital programme, but one of my commitments as mayor then is to commit the money that we need to provide our continuing 5 swimming pool capacity in Tower Hamlets. Now, I don't know if Mr. Thomas wants to come in at this point and maybe add to that, or maybe slip in 1 or 2 bits on the previous question.
Okay.
Yes, well, I thought it might just be helpful to add a bit of information about the kind of national context on these challenges, because the Local Government Association has recently reported on the challenge that there is for almost all councils in respect of their provision of leisure facilities and swimming pools. And they reported that 63% of main leisure centres and 60% of swimming pools, the buildings are all past their expected lifespans. And the local government association is calling on central government to recognise that and support local councils in being able to invest, because it is clear, as the Mayor has said, that we've got a legacy here of some ageing buildings, and clearly what we want to do is to ensure that our pools and our leisure centres are not only of really good quality so that people want to be using them, but that they're also sustainable for generations to come.
Okay, thank you, James. Now, the next question is, where would a pool at John Orwell be situated, and would we lose the hockey pitches? So we've had a few people asking that.
Okay, the answer on this is there are two answers to this. The simple answer is I don't precisely know, but I know that there are a number of options. You could provide a pool on the south side where there's currently a car park, or on the north end where there's currently a car parking area, or to the site which I always assumed was the most likely site, because this has been discussed for some time. In terms of the history of this, when the London Docklands Development Corporation was wound up many years ago, the land which ironically had been taken away from us by the government and given to the LDDC, a slab of it was given back to us, which was the triangular site to the west of the John Orwell Leisure Centre. And that triangular site was earmarked, as I understood it, for a potential swimming pool. So that idea 20 years ago or so was already there, that we might re-provide a swimming pool down in Wapping on the triangular site to the west. Now, I think that our I'm going to get the number wrong, but our 5G or whatever they are, hockey pitches, which are competition level hockey pitches are pretty useful and important, and they support some great sport for people. So my understanding and my commitment based on that understanding is that they would remain. They might need to be tweaked or shifted somewhere in order to reconfigure the site, but we'd still have hockey facilities down in Wapping. So there's no. If the question was, do we plan to knock down the hockey pitches and build a bloody great swimming pool there, pardon my language, the answer is no. I think there's enough land around there that we could provide a pool around the rest of the site and create a more comprehensive leisure centre down in Wapping. I could, if you like, move on to the next question, yep, which is an anonymous question, which says, could the other gym facilities be opened at the leisure centre and keep the pool closed? And I'm not too sure what that question means, but does it mean that could we provide even better gym facilities at the leisure centre and not re-provide a swimming pool? My commitment is that we want to re-provide a swimming pool, so we want to have 5 pools in the borough, but it may be that I'm reading this question wrong, in which case there might be a better answer. I
think, yeah.
But certainly, I mean, we have a capital programme, and providing we have a young population in the borough, and we need to keep people fit. We have a pretty unfit population in many cases in the borough as well. So providing good sports facilities is pretty important for people in our borough. And so if we can improve the offer at John Orwell, that would be, for my money, a priority that we need to balance against our other priorities. So I think the answer is yes, but I don't know if anyone understands the question better than I do.
I just wanted to add, Mayor, that I think the question was if we could keep the swimming pool facility closed and keep the leisure, the gym facilities open, would we be able to do that? The answer would be no, because we still require the actual work to reopen. So the actual gym part actually doesn't cost much. It's actually the swimming part of the facility at St. George's. So we won't be able to keep the gym facilities open whilst the swimming pool is closed. We need to take action altogether.
And it might be, with your agreement, Chair, it might be worth saying something about gyms, which is, of course, if you look around the borough, there are loads of private gyms around the borough. So we might want to ask, why the question might be asking, well, can we reopen the gym at St. George's? And part of the problem we have with the gym at St George's is it's been squeezed into little cubby holes and narrow spaces which weren't really designed for a gym. So when I used to go there was a cafe, which is now a gym area. So it's not really a very satisfactory space for gym facilities. And indeed, people vote with their money basically because it has a very low level of enrolment. And I think it wouldn't make sense for us to reopen the gym facilities at St George's and not reopen the rest of St George's. It's just not really viable. But in order to get through the business efficiently, I can see the next question, which is what will you do to help schools teach children to swim? And I think that Mr. Thomas's slideshow told us a bit about that, and we're doing some work because in his directorate he includes the schools service and our responsibility for the curriculum, working in partnership with schools. So he can answer the question about gym facilities, but maybe the question about schools as well. And there's another one, which is from Zoe.
Let's get James to answer that first.
I'm jumping ahead of myself. Yeah.
So in terms of schools, so we'll be working with each school that was previously using St George's. We know who they are. We know that some of them have already sorted themselves out for the next school year. But for those that haven't, we'll be working individually with each school and then thinking with them about the different options. And the options are, of course, that we've got Mile End and Poplar Baths, and shortly we'll have Tiller and York Hall available. We're also working with the small number of schools that have their own swimming pools to see if they're able to share their facilities to help out the primary schools in the southwest of the borough. And we have, and the question there from Zoe, we have also kind of got on our long list, if you like, if it is difficult for us to ensure every school has suitable arrangements from those options, then yes, we're prepared to look at other private pools if they provide a kind of better, more effective solution. So we're really committed. I mean, the primary schools have a duty to ensure that they provide swimming lessons. It's part of the national curriculum at Key Stage 2. So for those kind of the older end of primary schools, but our job is to support them and make sure that they can fulfil that.
Okay.
We've got a very short time, but very quickly we can answer this question. Can you please give us an overview of what leisure centre pools are open in the borough now? And if others are closed, when will they reopen? I think we've covered some of this question earlier on as well.
Okay. So I think I began to, by the way, on the Fitness First question, most of the private leisure operators don't have pools. Some of them might do. The reason they don't have them is they're incredibly expensive to build and maintain, and it's hard to make money out of them, which is why local councils should provide them, which is why I want us to have 5 pools. But what's open in the borough? Well, we have 5 pools in the borough, and St George's is clearly closed, because we're talking about this evening. Tiller Road is closed and it's being recommissioned and should be ready by, I'm told, about November, and I'm annoyed about that. York Hall, perhaps you can clarify that, Mr. Thomas. York Hall, I think, needs to be. Again, I'm frustrated, Ismail, because I understood it was about to open in May or June, and then heard that there was a problem, which might mean July, and I think it's about October or November now because there's extra work needed.
Even later.
Yeah. Well, Mr. Thomas or Sabina, do you want to answer that?
Okay. So looking at the works at the moment, the feedback we got now is perhaps, I don't really want to say it, perhaps December-ish time, but the latest we're saying is Jan. But obviously we are working pushing as much as we can to do much earlier. And like we said earlier, very disappointing that we couldn't reopen this summer.
Mm.
And I'm meeting with the team who are overseeing the works at both Tiller and York Hall every 2 weeks to ensure that we do everything that we can to reopen those as soon as possible.
And I've asked for a transparent process on this to explain why we've got to where we have. And there is a lot of frustration in my office that bits of the council don't seem to be on top of this issue. So I apologise for that. But they will be up and running. We'll have 4 by the new year. That's my intention. And I get weary of some of these things taking longer than it seems reasonable for them to take. And Mr. Thomas knows that very well.
Yes. Okay, the next question, will the feasibility study, and this will be the last question, will the feasibility study include consultation with Wapping residents?
And the answer to that is yes. The answer to that question is the feasibility study will include consultation, but it will include consultation with all residents in the borough, because obviously every pool in the borough is available for every resident of the borough and beyond. So we want to have a consultation as widely as possible, but clearly people in the southwest corner of the borough need to be involved. I'd add, I suppose, that St George's Pool is actually in the Shadwell ward of Tower Hamlets, and most of the campaign has originated in the Wapping area, where there's a very active community who love the pool and the facilities. But we need to include people across the borough, and particularly in the southwest corner of the borough. I could give a longer answer, which is that consultation on the feasibility study, well, we need to publish something, then people need to examine that, and then we need to answer questions, and then we need to publish something else. Now, you could, if you're not careful, be in a process where you ask questions until the end of time. So we need to define that process fairly clearly, and maybe that's a good point where Mr. Thomas can clarify what will happen on what timescales.
So we've committed to completing the feasibility work on both the short and long-term options within the next 3 months. So that should be by the end of October. At that point, we will be able to consult, because we'll be able to say what we think those options, the viable options are. And that consultation should then lead as quickly as possible to decisions being made by the council about which option to go with, and indeed what financial commitment will be required to deliver that.
Yeah. Okay, thank you, James and Mayor John Biggs, for answering the questions, and thank you all for joining us today. It's really important that we had today's session and planning more sessions, that we interact with you all, and we know St George's Lesson is really valuable and important to residents nearby and around the borough, and looking forward to everyone through the consultation as well. Like the Mayor said, we're happy to meet and answer more questions, and feedback will be given to the question that we haven't answered. And please take a moment afterwards to let us know what you thought of tonight's event. A link has been sent. And over to you now, Mayor John Biggs, to end the meeting on your closing remarks. Thank you.
Wow, I didn't know I had closing remarks. Well, I'm disappointed to be here this evening, because I think we have we should be in a better place, and we should have invested in the pool in the past, since before I became mayor, but since I became mayor as well. And I haven't had good information, but I'm responsible for this. I'm the mayor, and you elect me, or indeed not elect me, and we need to provide good leisure facilities for our residents. I'm absolutely committed to transparency on this process, and I want St George's or a replacement, but I'm happy either way, to be reopened, recommissioned and provided as soon as possible. And I'm looking forward to meeting you in the flesh in the autumn, where we'll have a livelier meeting. And I really don't mind lively meetings, by the way. I know people out there are frustrated, and it's quite right, you should be frustrated, and our job is to solve this problem. It's a slightly more complicated problem than I hoped it would be, but we need to get on and do it, and that's what I'm committed to doing. So thank you.